All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Planet Dirt. My name's Alicia, and it is time to get started in planning the 2025 garden. I'm super excited to get started. I don't know if anyone's like me. I used to dread January and taking down all of my Christmas decorations, and it was just very sad because things aren't as pretty. It's still cold. And then about 2 years ago, I think I discovered that if you start your onions from seed, you can start seed starting in January. Some people even do it in December, depending on your growing zone and where you're at. But here we start it in the middle of January, which is perfect for me. It gives me about a week or two to get my Christmas tree down, to get all of my seed starting stuff set up in its place. I have a nice sunny spot by the window where I put everything. And so I'm super excited. It has given me something to look forward to in January. And when it's still cold outside, you don't really want to get outside yet, but you still want to grow things. I still like to grow things. I like seeing things sprout, and it just spreads out the growing love a little bit longer for those of us in short growing seasons. We really miss it over the winter season. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to take you through the process. When I was first starting to plan for this year, I thought I could cram it all into one video, and that's just not going to happen because I have a bunch of different growing spaces. And so I kind of broke it up into two parts. This first part, we're going to focus on what's going in the greenhouse this year, my grow bags, and then I have 2 Greenstalks that I'm going to plant out. So we're going to go over that, my plan, my process, what I'm putting everywhere and how many of everything I'm putting. So we're going to go through that today. And then in the next video, in part 2, we're going to go out and go over all of the outside spaces and see if I can come up with a semblance of a plan out there. I haven't been growing out there as long as I have been growing in the greenhouse. And so that one's going to be a little bit more experimental. I feel like the greenhouse is in a really good spot for this upcoming year and going into it with a lot of confidence. And the outdoor spaces, they're going to be much more experimental. We're just going to kind of do our best and see what happens. So without further ado, let's get into greenhouse growing. So over the years, I've gone through various stages of my planning and what has worked and trying to write stuff down. I'm not really great at writing stuff down, part of the reason I'm doing videos. But I have done various logs over the years. I have a couple of these, lovely garden planners where I jot certain things down, and they work to an extent, right? But I think the garden journals are hard for me because I think everyone goes about their processing in a little bit of a different way. And so when you get someone's garden journal, it's thinking things through in the way that that gardener thinks it through every year, and not necessarily what's going to work for your particular space, what kind of things you like to eat, like things you like to grow. And so I have this and I use it in pieces. I definitely, start with what do I like to grow? And it has definitely helped. In this one, there's a little what did I learn this year section, which is honestly super helpful because I write that down at the end of the season or throughout the season when things aren't going very well or are going very well, and something that I tried really worked. And something like the onions, for instance, those you harvest in June or July, you harvest them pretty early in the summer. And so by the time you start the seeds again in the next year, chances are you're not really going to remember what you were super excited about doing well or something really awesome that happened. And so that part of this journal is super helpful. I definitely still use that part. But I started out this year with basically just writing down my thoughts of what I know needs to go in the greenhouse And that's things like determinate tomatoes, peppers, and I also put my onions in here. Those are things that the onions just benefit from having a little protection in the early spring when it still gets pretty cold here. We get random snows. And so putting stuff that you actually want to produce out in a garden bed outside isn't really the best idea. You can do it, I'm sure, and create a little bit of extra protection out there. But for me, it's easier to just put them in the greenhouse. And then by the time you harvest them in early summer, there's still enough time for me to pull them out and put something else in their place and still have plenty of time to grow it in the rest of the summer and early fall. So that's kind of where I start out. So I'm going to show you my garden planner. I have a spreadsheet on the computer. It looks like this. And I start out with just the layout of my greenhouse. So I label the beds. I have 4 raised beds in the greenhouse. And then I also have in this spreadsheet the other things we're going to be talking about today, which are my Greenstalks. And then I have 4 big grow bags that I'm planning on putting sweet potatoes. So going into planning, you need to have a general idea of what you want to grow and where it's going to grow best. Or at least where you're going to try to grow it best this year, right? Nobody's perfect. You don't go into it knowing everything. But that's what this process is for, is having some plan, sticking to the plan, and then being able to pivot or change it for next year when things don't work, or making sure that you know when they do work really well, and then you can repeat it again the following year. So I got the greenhouse beds all set up in the spreadsheet. And what I did was I made each box 1 square foot of the beds. So my beds inside the greenhouse are 3 by 6, and there are 4 of them. So that's what has determined the size of them on this spreadsheet. And for me, that just makes it easy for me to determine how much of each plant is going to go into each bed. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we're determining how many plants we're going to start. All right, so going into this, I know that there are several things that I know I want to be able to get into the raised beds in the greenhouse. They are determinate tomatoes. I'm going to only plant determinate tomatoes in the greenhouse this year, and that's mainly a spacing issue. I've grown indeterminate tomatoes in here before, and they run out of room way too early in the season for me to get a good yield. So I'm going to get determinate tomatoes in the greenhouse. I'm going to do my peppers in here again. Peppers do really well in the greenhouse because it's hot. It stays a little more humid. This is a very dry climate, and so that added humidity that it keeps in the greenhouse actually does really well for the peppers. And I'm going to do sweet and hot peppers. And then I'm going to put a few sweet potatoes in the farthest bed behind me, just to see how well they do. Again, it's a climate issue in here. I'm going to have some sweet potatoes also in the grow bags, and I'm going to put those outside once it's warm enough to do so. I'm going to start them in the greenhouse so that I can get a little bit of extra growing time. But then when I put them outside, it is very dry here. And so it's my own little experiment to see if the humidity in the greenhouse is going to make a big difference in terms of yield for those. So I'm going to have a few sweet potatoes in here. My onions, like I said, I'm going to have my onions in the garden beds, and I'm going to try to beef up the numbers of those since I did really well growing those last year. I had a bunch of different types in the greenhouse, and there were a couple of different things that I did that I'll talk a little bit about later, that some of my onions did really well, some of them did less well, but the ones that did less well, I think I can change the circumstances there and try to get a better yield. And then the other thing that I always plant in here is my companion planting. So next to my tomatoes, I always make sure and put some marigolds and a bunch of basil. I grow a ton of basil. I love basil. It's probably my favorite herb, and it's just so versatile. You can use it I use it all summer to make teas. My favorite is lemon basil, and just add a little bit of honey, and it's an amazing, refreshing tea during the summer. So I grow a lot of basil, and I make sure and I space that into my tomatoes, and that definitely helps with the pest pressure. I don't generally get a lot of hornworms since I've started doing that. Aphids generally stay away from my plants in here just because I heavily interplant with those types of things. Also, fun fact. So last year I had onions. This is another reason why I'm putting the onions in the greenhouse next to my peppers. So the peppers are really small and they grow really slowly. And so I can put them in between the rows of onions. And by the time they're starting to get bigger, it's time to harvest the onions. But I really like that the onions help with the aphid pressure, especially when the pepper plants are really young. When I planted my onions next to my peppers in one of my beds last year, I saw 0 aphids on any of those pepper plants. And then a couple of beds down, I had a couple of other pepper plants that they were already getting shaded out a little bit by my gigantic tomatoes that grow way fast. So they were already struggling a little bit, but those ones were covered in aphids, and it's because they didn't have anything next to them that was deterring those pests. So that's definitely something I'm going to continue to do, is interplant the peppers and the onions just to tamp down on the pest pressure a little bit. All right, we talked a little bit about the grow bags. I'm only going to put sweet potatoes in the grow bags this year. I've done potatoes in grow bags, but quite honestly, I'm just really bad at remembering to water my grow bags. And so it's dry here. It's hard for me to keep the moisture up. So I'm going to try really hard this year. Maybe I'll put them in a spot where they get sprinklers sprayed on them, and that will help me out. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But also, the Greenstalks, what I generally put in the Greenstalks is, again, lots of basil. I love basil. I have so much of it, and all different kinds too. And then strawberries and lots of flowers. I like to put the trailing nasturtiums in the Greenstalks, and there are a couple of, I think they're called Johnny Jump Ups. They bloom like several times a year, and they're one of the earliest blooms for me. And so I like to put those in the green stalk too. It makes me very happy when I see something blooming early spring. So that's kind of my general plan as I'm going into this spreadsheet. All right, so the first thing I started with was what is already in my beds. So in the far right bed behind me, I have celery still growing. I still have parsley. It overwinters beautifully here, so I'm going to leave that in the bed as well. I also have some Swiss chard still growing in that bed. And I have a problem pulling out really healthy, nice looking plants. I also still have some kale in that bed as well that I completely forgot about when I was first starting to make this chart. So I'm going to try to leave those in as long as and then as I need space, I can cut back. But it is really hard for me to, I'll put up a picture maybe of the Swiss chard. It's just doing beautifully, and I have a hard time ripping out plants like that are just still doing so well, still producing food. So I'm going to leave it there for as long as I can and try to work around it. So next up, I wanted to do my tomato spacing. So I keep my tomatoes and my peppers, or at least I try to, in the middle 2 beds. And that is because they get the least amount of draft and cold in those beds. So I can start them a little bit earlier in the greenhouse. I can put them out about a month before our last frost date, and it stays plenty warm in here for me to be able to do that. But I do like to give them that extra few feet of protection and put them in the middle of the greenhouse where it's the least likely to drop into cooler temperatures. So first I started out with my tomato spacing, and I'm trying to not overplant my tomatoes this year. So I'm going to put 1 plant in square foot space but I'm going to zigzag them. I don't know what the word is for that, but I'm going to put them so that there's at least a block of space in between on either side. And that is where I'm going to put my basil, my marigolds, and all that good stuff. But I'm trying my hardest to give these tomatoes a fighting chance and to actually let me produce stuff. And so I'm going to try really hard not to grow an insane amount of tomato plants and just throw them all in a bed like I've done in years past. All right, and next up is onions. I'm dedicating a lot of space to onions this year because I had a really good crop last year, and it only lasted me like 3-4 months after I harvested it. I guess we eat a lot of onions. I don't know, but it was so nice to have them in the pantry. I did get a bunch freeze dried. I gave them to my mom. She has a freeze dryer. So I had a bunch that were freeze dried, which was really nice. I still have some onion powder from that. But as far as fresh eating goes, I ran out like a month and a half ago now. It was right before Thanksgiving that I ran out of onions. So it was really nice having all of those, but I just want to try to get more. And I had eaten through them before the onions hadn't even thought about sprouting. Like they weren't even close to going bad. And we had already eaten through all of them. So I'm super excited about that, but I am going to put in a bunch of onions this year and hope that I can beef up those numbers. I said I'm going to be interplanting them in between the rows of onions as best I can. So I'm going to have a section for sweet peppers, and then we're going to do a section for hot peppers. And I have a lot of sweet peppers still, honestly, frozen and freeze-dried from last year. So I don't know if I'm going to keep what I have written down right now as far as how many sweet peppers versus hot peppers go. But I thought this was a good starting point. And then when I go back over my seeds, I'll situating about my varieties and make some decisions then about how many hot versus sweet. But last year I didn't really have any hot pepper harvest. I got maybe a handful, and it's because of where I had them placed. They just didn't do very well, and my sweet peppers did really well. So I have an abundance left over from last year of sweet peppers, not very many hot peppers, and I really want to try to do some salsas and hot sauces for my husband this year. So I'm going to try to, balance the scales on the peppers, and we'll see how it goes. Next up is my basil and marigolds. Like I said, I'm going to interplant those with the tomatoes and make sure that I can keep the pest pressure down. I really like putting the basil in there because, again, the tomato plants get pretty big. Even the determinate ones, they're going to get pretty fat, right? They're going to get wide. And the basil plants they don't get very big, especially if you're harvesting from them all the time, which I do because I'm constantly pulling them off to make tea or whatever. So as long as you harvest pretty regularly, those ones don't get very big, and they won't put any pressure on the tomatoes. So I'm not worried about putting them so many within that bed. Next up are sweet potatoes, and I also thought about bunching onions. So I think I'm going to do some bunching onions in that far bed along with the sweet potatoes. So I have room. I'm only going to do a couple of sweet potatoes in that bed because they do get crazy. I'm not insane. I don't want you to think I'm crazy and I have unrealistic expectations. I know sweet potatoes go nuts. I know the vines are going to crawl all over the place, and I don't want them to cover my entire walkway. So I'm only going to put a couple of plants in that bed. It's mostly just to see if they do well in the greenhouse versus the grow bags outside. So I just want to have a couple. So I'm going to put a couple in there. And then I also think I'm going to put some bunching onions in that bed because I like having that be the bed where I just come out and I can cut a few things and, throw them on an omelet or something. That is usually the bed that I go to when I'm making a quiche. I pull off some Swiss chard, chop it up, throw it in the quiche. Same thing with celery. I can come out and just grab some celery, some parsley. And so it makes sense to put the bunching onions there because I'll just be cutting and running back inside the house. So I think that's a good idea. I went back after I was looking at this, because this is an ever-changing chart, right? None of this is static. This is just a general plan to get us started. And so I went back and I was looking at where I had the tomatoes spaced, and I think if I cut one plant out, I was just trying to maximize the number of plants I had in that space. And if I cut one tomato plant out and just move them around a little bit, it makes more sense and it's more evenly spread across the bed. So I'm going to do that as well. So I do have some space in the empty bed, and we'll just ponder that and think on it, and we'll come back to it after we talk about some of the other spots. So the Greenstalks, I have a bunch of strawberries still in there. I'm hoping that a lot of them are still alive. They look alive, they overwinter here usually, but I've never had them in Greenstalks before this last winter. And so they've overwintered in pots here perfectly fine. I'm assuming it's going to be the same as with the Greenstalk. So I have at least 4 of those towers right now with strawberries in them. And I'm probably going to have to get some more plugs because I do want to eventually have just one full Greenstalk of strawberries. But, it's a process, and every year some of them die, and then you get new little runners coming off of the plants, and I plant those out. And so it's just a constantly moving number. So I'm hoping this year, or maybe next year, sometime in the future, I'll have one full of strawberries. But this year, if I can get at least, 3/4 of one full of strawberries, I'll probably be happy. And then I'm going to fill them up. I usually put basil and flowers also in the Greenstalks. And I really like that because I keep them right by the back porch, and I can just run out there and grab some basil off of the plant and come back inside. So that's my plan for those. But again, that could change. I really like having nasturtiums and flowers and stuff in there, but I'm also thinking that I can have some there, but I need to be planting more flowers out actually in the garden beds as well. So for the pollinators and such. So I don't know. This is what we're going with right now, and then we'll adjust as needed as we go on. So one last thing about the empty bed in here, I think I'm going to just keep with the greens theme. I have some kale in there still. I have some other greens. I can probably put some leeks in that bed as well. I tried to put some leeks in there last year, and they got kind of overshadowed because I had some fennel in there, and the fennel just went absolutely insane and it shaded stuff out. So sometimes I just experiment in beds and I see what happens. And last year that was definitely the experiment bed, and the fennel did great. The celery did great. It's still chugging along over there. But the leeks were one of the things that they got crowded out because I think I just crammed too much in that bed. So maybe I'll try leeks again in that bed and see what happens. All right. So based on this, we are going to do some lovely math. So for the onions, for each square foot, I can fit about 9 onion starts in each square foot, give or take. My spacing isn't always exact. I don't go out there with like a ruler, and I don't have one of those little square things, where it pushes and then you can mark in the dirt where you're going. I'm not that exact. I tend to just go out there and enjoy myself while I'm planting out my rows. So I can fit about 9 right within one square foot. So I counted up all the blocks in this spreadsheet, multiplied it by 9. There's 18 sections, and that equals 162 onion starts. So that's what I need to aim for when I'm starting onions this next week. That sounds like a lot of onions, right? But the thing about onions is they don't really take up that much space. Like I said, 9 in 1 square foot, that's not very many. They're not very big. Right? I don't know. Maybe I need to look up my math a little more. I don't know. But 162 starts, I have like 5 or 6 varieties. And so that comes down to, less than 50 starts per variety. And so when you break it down like that, it's actually not that many onions. So I think that's actually a really good number. I think last year I planted out about half that many, and that makes sense because I only put them in one bed. One bed was really dedicated to that, and then I had a row of peppers in between. And then the rest of it was onions. So I think that 162 is actually a pretty reasonable number to shoot for. So we'll see how that works out. And then we're going to move on to some pepper math. So based on this, again, this is fluid. I might change it around because I don't really enjoy spicy peppers that much, but I do know that they're insanely prolific. When I have been successful in growing them, I got 1.5 million jalapeno peppers off of 2 plants. So I don't really want to overwhelm myself, but I also like trying new things. So who knows? Maybe I will grow all these spicy peppers and I'll just play with all the varieties and see what happens. So for the sweet peppers, based on this, I can grow 6 varieties, and I'm going to put 2 plants in each square foot. That sounds really close together, but when you're talking about peppers, they're not very sturdy plants. They like being close together, and I just put 2 of the same variety right next to each other, maybe 4 or 5 inches apart, and then they kind of help support each other as they grow up. And then I won't have to stake them as much. I'll probably have to stake them, but it won't be until like August that I'll have to stake them. They'll grow up pretty tall and strong and help support each other. And then maybe later on I'll have to give them a little support when the peppers start, weighing the branches down. But for the most part, it's going to be a lower maintenance thing on my end, and you can cram in more plants so you're going to get a better yield overall. So I'll probably have about 12 plants of different varieties of sweet peppers. And then for the hot peppers, based on this chart, I can have 9 varieties, 2 plants each. So that's 18 plants. So, and this could change based on what seeds I have, but I think that's a good starting spot. And I know I do have a bunch of hot peppers that I haven't grown successfully because I haven't started them early enough. Hot peppers do notoriously take a long time to germinate, and they take a long time to get started. So that's why overwintering peppers is so popular, is because especially the hot ones, they just take forever to start growing. And things like your sweet peppers and your tomatoes, when I first started gardening, I don't know why, but I had it in my head that you just start them all at the same time. And so what happens is the fast growing stuff just takes off and takes over. And then the slow growing stuff is just sitting there looking puny. And it's because you should have started it 6-8 weeks before your tomatoes. And I don't even think the seed packs say that a lot of the time. Like they say, oh, start like 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date. And in reality, you should start them just in a bigger pot and start them 10 weeks before your last frost date so that they're big enough, and then they won't take as long to yield once you get them in the ground. So that's just my 2 cents. So based on the same math, we are also looking at about 32 sweet potato slips for the area that I have. And I have never started sweet potato slips. I'm going to do that in a couple of weeks. I have 1 sweet potato right now. I'm going to go down to the market with one of my friends in the next week or 2, and we're going to get some more sweet potatoes, some fun varieties, and I'm going to try to start my own sweet potato slips. I will bring you along with that when that happens. But I don't know really how many you generally get off of a sweet potato. So I don't know if I'm going to hit the 32 mark, but we'll see. It's a good goal to strive for, I guess. All right, so that is pretty much it for this part of it. I did want to briefly bring up what I use as far as scheduling goes. So this spreadsheet I use as a general like garden plan, what goes where, and that's what I try to stick to when I'm starting plants so that I at least have an idea. I'm not trying to be wasteful of my seeds. And I do want to have a plan going in of what works well together, what's not going to shade something else out, what's slow growing, what's fast growing, that sort of thing. But I also use Seed Time, and I will put the link in the description. I think it's just seedtime.us. But they have a free side of their platform. They also have a paid side that's like, oh, super interactive, and you get to move your plants around and on your little map, and it's super cool. But they have a free option as well, and it helps you just give you a guide for when to start your seeds. So I'll show you an example of that. I just have a few of the varieties in here right now. I don't put in every single variety that I'm planting. I just pick one type of plant. Like at the top it says basil. And then I just know that when I go off of this calendar, I should be starting all my basil at the same time. I do sort out my sweet peppers, my hot peppers, my indeterminate tomatoes, and my determinate tomatoes on here because honestly, I think I'm going to play around with the timings. So they give you a general, this is when you should start it based on your last frost date, based on the information that is on that seed packet. So it's really useful if you're just going for a baseline, but I wanted to get those things parsed out for this year because my indeterminate tomatoes, I'm going in the greenhouse. And I know that in my greenhouse, I can put out those plants in the ground about a month earlier than my last frost date. So I'm going to be starting my determinate tomatoes a month earlier than my indeterminate tomatoes because all of my indeterminate tomatoes are going to be going outside. And so I do have to wait till my last frost date for those. And then my sweet and hot peppers, like I said, I've had issues with germination time for hot peppers in the past. So I'm thinking I'm going to start those a couple weeks sooner. So I'm just going to go in and manually adjust those times on this chart. But this tool is insanely helpful when you're thinking about seed starting for a bunch of different varieties because I don't know about you, but seriously, beginning gardeners, I don't know if there's just not a lot of information out there or if we just make assumptions, but I did it for, I don't know, 2 years or so at the beginning. And I was like, oh, it's time to start seeds because it's 8 weeks out from my start date. And so I just started everything at the exact same time. And life doesn't work like that. Gardens don't work like that. And so I found this tool super helpful because not only does it spread out the work, it tells you, you shouldn't transplant sweet potatoes out until 2 weeks after your last frost date. You shouldn't start this inside. You should direct sow it after your last frost. You should do all that stuff. But it tells you all of that information as you're typing it in for each variety. And I found that super helpful because it spreads out the workload. It seems a lot less overwhelming when you look at it and you're like, oh, this week I only have to start my onions. In the next 2 weeks, I only have to start my sweet potato slits. And then in a few weeks, I only have to start my hot peppers. I don't have to sit there, and it's a lot less time consuming and overwhelming if you don't have to do it all at once. So I really like that about this tool. I think it's super helpful. Like I said, I'll link it down below. Show you a little snippet. I just wanted to show you a little snippet of that tool that I use as well. So write things down, put it in a spreadsheet, take a video, take a picture, do whatever works best for you for what's going to help you with your memory. And thank you so much for coming along with me today. And I'll see you next time when we try to get the rest of the garden planned. Bye, everyone.